Imagine a bond so profound, it defies the very laws of nature. A park ranger, a man dedicated to the untamed heart of the American wilderness, and a mountain lion, the silent, powerful king of its domain. Their paths cross not once, but twice, in moments of life or death peril, forging a connection that whispers of an understanding far deeper than words. This is the story of Ethan and the majestic cougar whose lives became inextricably, astonishingly, linked in the rugged, beautiful expanse of Arrowhead National Park. Ethan wasn't just a park ranger. He was a custodian of the wild, a young man whose spirit seemed to mirror the untamed peaks and whispering pine forests of Arrowhead National Park. Nestled deep within a vast, mountainous region reminiscent of the Grand Sierras, Arrowhead was a sanctuary of soaring granite cliffs, ancient sequoia groves, and meadows painted with seasonal wildflowers. Ethan, with his sun-weathered face, a perpetual squint from scanning distant ridgelines, and a sturdy build honed by years of hiking challenging trails, had felt the pull of such places since boyhood. He'd grown up on stories of legendary conservationists, of thrilling encounters with nature, and the quiet satisfaction of protecting something precious. His uniform, a practical khaki shirt and durable cargo pants, topped with a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his keen blue eyes, was more than just work attire. It was a symbol of his life's passion. Each day began before the sun fully crested the formidable eastern peaks, the air still crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth. He'd nurse a steaming mug of strong black coffee on the porch of his small ranger cabin, watching the first rays of light spill over the landscape, turning the dew-kissed foliage into a carpet of diamonds. His love for nature wasn't a passive appreciation. It was an active, breathing commitment. He knew the park's creatures, from the skittish herds of mule deer that grazed in the alpine meadows to the elusive coyotes whose yips echoed in the twilight, and even the occasional black bear lumbering through the undergrowth. But it was the park's population of mountain lions, or cougars as they were often called, that held a particular, almost reverent place in his heart. There were perhaps a dozen of these magnificent predators roaming Arrowhead's vast territory, and Ethan felt a profound responsibility for their well-being, a silent promise to ensure their wildness endured. One crystalline morning, with the sun painting the sky in hues of soft pink and molten gold, Ethan set off in his rugged, four-wheel drive Jeep for his routine patrol. The air was cool and invigorating, filled with the chirping of unseen birds and the distant murmur of the Serpentine River snaking its way through the valley below. His route that day took him towards Cougar Ridge, a craggy, rock-strewn escarpment known to be a favored haunt of one of the local lion prides. These formidable rock formations, with their hidden ledges and shaded overhangs, provided ideal shelter, strategic vantage points for hunting, and safe nurseries for their young. As Ethan navigated the winding dirt track, his experienced eyes scanned the terrain. He slowed the Jeep as he approached a particularly sheer section of the ridge. And then he saw them, a group of young mountain lion cubs, perhaps 3 or 4 months old, tumbling and pouncing with boundless, carefree energy near the very edge of a precipitous drop. Their spotted coats, a temporary camouflage soon to fade into the tawny magnificence of adulthood, blended surprisingly well with the dappled sunlight filtering through the sparse ponderosa pines. A smile touched Ethan's lips. It was moments like these, witnessing the unbridled joy of wild creatures in their natural habitat, that reaffirmed his dedication. But his smile was tinged with a familiar anxiety. The cliff edge was a dangerous playground for such inexperienced youngsters. He watched, captivated, as they chased each other, their clumsy leaps and mock battles a charming display of youthful exuberance. Their tiny, needle-sharp claws scrabbled on the rock, their small, fierce growls more like kittenish mews. Ethan reached for his binoculars, a silent observer of their innocent world. Suddenly, his breath caught in his throat. He saw it happen in a sickening slow motion that belied the speed of the event. One of the cubs, in a particularly boisterous leap, landed too close to the unstable edge. A section of the rock, loosened by time and weather, began to crumble beneath its paws. Ethan's heart leaped into his throat. An adult lioness, likely their mother, who had been lounging on a sun-warmed slab nearby, instantly sprang to attention. A low, guttural roar ripped from her chest, a sound of urgent warning. She moved with lightning speed towards the cubs, her powerful muscles rippling beneath her sleek coat, desperately trying to call them back from the precipice. But the playful cubs, engrossed in their game, didn't immediately heed her desperate calls. The lioness, driven by an instinct older than the mountains themselves, reached the edge just as the ground gave way. It was a horrifying moment. The weight of the adult lioness, as she scrambled to secure her footing and reach her offspring, may have been the final straw for the precarious outcrop. With a sickening lurch, a large chunk of rock broke free, taking one of the terrified cubs with it. Ethan watched in horror as the small, spotted body tumbled through the air, a desperate, high-pitched cry swallowed by the vastness of the canyon. His training kicked in. "Ranger dispatch, this is Ethan at Cougar Ridge," he barked in his radio, his voice tight with urgency. "I have a juvenile mountain lion, repeat, juvenile, fallen from the cliff face. Currently stranded on a narrow ledge, approximately 50 feet down, requesting immediate assistance in a climbing rig." Miraculously, the cub hadn't fallen all the way. Its descent had been broken by a small, jutting rock ledge, barely wide enough to hold its trembling body. It clung there, mewling pitifully, its wide, terrified eyes fixed on the terrifying drop below. Without waiting for a response, knowing every second counted, Ethan slammed the Jeep into gear. He couldn't reach the cub from above without specialized equipment, but he had to do something. He drove the Jeep closer to the cliff edge, honking the horn loudly and maneuvering the vehicle to create a commotion, hoping to distract the remaining lions on the ridge, to give himself and eventually the rescue team a safer window to operate. The agitated lioness paced back and forth above, her roars echoing her distress. But Ethan's calculated disturbance seemed to keep her from attempting a dangerous descent herself. By the time his colleagues, Sarah and Ben, arrived in another Jeep, their faces grim with concern, Ethan had already retrieved a set of strong climbing ropes and a harness from his vehicle's emergency kit. The area was still fraught with tension. The mother lion was a powerful, unpredictable force. "We need to secure the area as best we can," Ethan instructed, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Sarah, keep an eye on her. Ben, help me with this rig." Together, they worked quickly, their movements practiced and efficient. Ethan, as the initiator of the rescue and the most experienced climber among them, knew he had to take the lead. He secured one end of the rope to the sturdy frame of his Jeep, checked his harness, and then, with a deep breath, began the perilous descent down the sheer rock face. Loose scree skittered away under his boots. The wind whipped around him, carrying the scent of dry rock and the faint, musky odor of the lions. Reaching the ledge, he found the cub frozen in terror, pressed flat against the cold stone. It was small, no bigger than a house cat, but its eyes held a wild, primal fear. Ethan spoke to it in low, soothing tones, the way one might calm a frightened child, moving slowly, deliberately, to avoid startling it further. "Easy there, little guy," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper above the wind. "We're going to get you out of this." With infinite patience, he managed to loop a specially adapted, soft sling under the cub's small body. The cub flinched but didn't resist, perhaps sensing the gentle intent in his touch. Once it was secure, Ethan gave a signal. Above, Ben and Sarah began to pull, slowly, steadily, on the rope. It was an arduous process. The cub, though small, was dead weight, and the angle was awkward. Ethan guided its ascent, protecting its fragile body from scraping against the jagged rocks. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, with a last concerted heave, the cub was pulled over the edge to safety. It lay on the solid ground, panting, exhausted, but miraculously unharmed. The mother lioness, who had been watching the entire operation with an almost unbearable intensity, let out a soft, rumbling sound, a mix of relief and lingering anxiety. Ethan, his own muscles aching, unclipped himself and knelt beside the rescued cub. He didn't try to touch it further. He simply looked into its amber eyes, and for a fleeting, extraordinary moment, he felt a connection, a silent acknowledgement pass between them. The cub, after a moment, let out a tiny, breathy sound, almost like a purr, and then, slowly, shakily, it got to its feet and trotted towards its waiting mother, who nuzzled it tenderly before leading her brood away into the protective shadows of the rocks. Ethan watched them go, a profound sense of satisfaction and something akin to wonder settling over him. Several months passed. The vibrant colors of summer faded into the golden hues of autumn, and then the first heavy snows of winter blanketed Arrowhead, transforming it into a silent, white wilderness. Spring eventually returned, and with it, the notorious late spring deluges, a period that always filled the rangers with a degree of apprehension. These torrential downpours could turn gentle streams into raging torrents, saturate the hillsides, and trigger dangerous floods and mudslides, posing a significant threat to the park's wildlife and infrastructure. One particularly grim morning, an exceptionally intense storm was lashing the park. Sheets of rain hammered down, reducing visibility to near zero, and the wind howled through the canyons like a tormented spirit. Ethan was out on his routine patrol, his Jeep's wipers battling valiantly, but struggling to keep the windshield clear. The familiar dirt tracks had turned into slick, muddy rivulets. He was navigating a narrow pass when he came across a massive, uprooted pine tree lying squarely across the road, its tangled roots exposed like the gnarled fingers of some subterranean giant. He stopped the Jeep, pulling the hood of his heavy-duty rain jacket over his head, and stepped out into the pouring rain to assess the situation. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and pine needles. He thought about the smaller animals whose burrows and nests might have been destroyed by the tree's fall or the ensuing erosion. Ethan was so engrossed in these thoughts, his senses dulled by the relentless drumming of the rain, that he didn't immediately register the growing rumble. It started as a low, distant vibration, almost imperceptible, but it rapidly intensified into a deep, guttural roar of shifting earth and stone. When he finally looked up, his blood ran cold. A monstrous wall of mud, rocks, and uprooted vegetation was surging down the mountainside directly towards him, an unstoppable, churning behemoth. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through him. He instinctively turned to sprint back to the Jeep, but a sickening realization hit him. He'd never make it. The mudslide was moving with terrifying speed. His only conceivable refuge was the very tree that blocked his path. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, he scrambled onto the massive, fallen trunk, clawing for purchase on the slick bark, wrapping his arms and legs around its girth as tightly as he could. Moments later, the wave of mud hit with the force of a freight train. He felt a powerful, crushing weight, the world dissolving into a maelstrom of cold, suffocating darkness. The roar was deafening. He squeezed his eyes shut, every muscle straining to hold on, praying that the tree would hold, that he wouldn't be ripped away and swallowed by the churning chaos. When the initial, violent surge subsided, Ethan found himself entombed. He was buried beneath a thick, heavy layer of mud and debris. Miraculously, a small pocket of air had formed around his face, allowing him to gasp for breath. But he was trapped, pinned, his limbs leaden and unresponsive. The cold was seeping into his bones, and the immense pressure on his chest made each breath a painful effort. He tried to move, to free himself, but he was almost completely immobilized, the dense, wet earth holding him in an unyielding grip. Time lost all meaning. Minutes could have been hours. He fought against the rising tide of despair, knowing his colleagues would be dealing with the aftermath of the storm across the park. How long would it be before anyone noticed his absence? How long before they started looking for him in this desolate, rain-lashed corner of Arrowhead? His energy was waning, the cold numbing his extremities. Then, through the oppressive silence, broken only by the dripping rain, he heard it, a faint, yet distinct, scratching sound coming from somewhere above him. At first, it was barely noticeable, just a soft, rustling noise amidst the heavy, damp stillness. He strained his ears, wondering if it was just the settling of the debris, or perhaps a small animal. The scratching grew more insistent, more purposeful, and then a sound reached his ears that sent a chill far colder than the mud down his spine. A deep, resonant roar, powerful and commanding, echoing through the storm-laden air. It was unmistakable, a mountain lion. Panic flickered, but then something in the quality of the roar, in the determined nature of the digging sounds that followed, held it at bay. It wasn't a sound of aggression or threat. It was something else entirely, something he couldn't quite decipher. Moments later, which felt like an eternity, he heard new sounds cutting through the noise of the rain. Human voices, shouts of his name. Relief, potent and overwhelming, flooded through him. Strong hands began to dig, clearing the mud and debris from around him. Fresh air, blessedly cool and clean, rushed into his lungs, and he gasped, savoring each crisp breath as if he'd been reborn. As his colleagues finally pulled him free from his earthy prison, lifting him out of the wreckage, Ethan, dazed and shivering, saw something he could barely comprehend. Standing beside the group of rangers, its golden fur drenched and matted with mud, its powerful body radiating an aura of wild majesty, was a massive, fully grown mountain lion. And Ethan recognized it instantly. Despite its disheveled state, despite the months that had passed, he knew. It was the same lion, the very cub he had rescued from the cliff face. His colleagues, their faces a mixture of relief and utter disbelief, quickly explained. They had been searching for him, their progress hampered by the storm and the widespread damage. Then, they'd encountered the lion. It had been acting strangely, roaring and digging frantically at a specific spot near the fallen tree. Its unusual, insistent behavior had drawn their attention, and following its lead, they had discovered Ethan buried beneath the rubble. He was alive because of this lion. Ethan could hardly believe what had happened. The idea that a wild animal, a predator by nature, had recognized him, remembered him, and then, against all odds, against all natural instinct, had returned the favor and saved him in return, was beyond anything he had ever imagined. A deep sense of gratitude, profound and humbling, swelled in his chest. As he sat there on the muddy ground, recovering from the ordeal, the storm beginning to subside, the lion locked eyes with him. There was something in its gaze, something unspoken yet profoundly understood. It was a silent acknowledgement, a bond that transcended species, a moment of pure, unadulterated connection in the heart of the wild. Not just gratitude, but perhaps, Ethan dared to think, the beginning of an extraordinary, almost mythical friendship between man and beast. The lion held his gaze for a long moment. Then, with a barely audible huff, it turned and, with a lithe, powerful grace that belied its muddy state, melted back into the rain-swept forest, disappearing as silently as it had arrived. In the days and weeks that followed, as life in Arrowhead National Park slowly returned to normal after the devastating storm, Ethan often thought about the rescued lion. He hoped to see it up close again, though he knew the chances were slim. Wild creatures, even one that had shown such extraordinary behavior, generally kept their distance. Yet, something remarkable occurred. The lion, once elusive and wary of humans, no longer entirely avoided people in the park. Though it still maintained a respectful distance, Ethan would often catch glimpses of it during his patrols. A flash of tawny fur in the undergrowth, a pair of intense amber eyes watching him from a distant ridge. And each time, they would exchange a look, a silent communion filled with mutual respect and an understanding that needed no words. It was a reminder of the incredible, almost magical event that had taken place. A reminder that even in the wild, where survival was often the harshest law of nature, compassion and connection could emerge in the most unexpected of ways. The amazing story of mutual help between Ethan and the lion quickly spread throughout the park and far beyond. It became an example of how kindness and compassion can overcome any boundaries, even those between different species. Many people, hearing this story, were deeply touched and began to look at the relationships between humans and wild animals in a new, more profound way. Ethan, for his part, continued his work with a renewed sense of purpose, his heart forever imprinted with the image of a magnificent, muddy lion and the undeniable truth that the wild held wonders far greater than he could ever have conceived. The bond was real, a testament to the day a ranger saved a lion, and a lion, in turn, saved a ranger. And sometimes, in the quiet glow of a sunset over Arrowhead's peaks, Ethan would stand by his Jeep, gazing out at the vast wilderness, and he'd swear he could feel a pair of knowing, amber eyes watching him from the shadows, a silent guardian of the wild, and a friend. Did you enjoy this story? It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Do you believe in the possibility of such a genuine, life-altering friendship between humans and animals? Let us know in the comments below.